The title of the study is, Can Regional Sovereign Wealth Funds Expand and Grow in Latin America? The study examines why Latin America lags behind other regions in establishing sovereign wealth funds that do more than just stabilize fiscal accounts instead of fostering long-term development. Despite Latin America's rich natural resources, most of its existing sovereign wealth funds are traditional stabilization funds without the broader economic impact that we see in other regions like Africa and Asia. The report identifies barriers such as fiscal deficits, political influences, and limited institutional capacity, which have hindered the evolution of these funds into tools for economic diversification and intergenerational wealth. It also highlights the potential of strategic investment funds to attract foreign capital, foster new industries, and address regional infrastructure needs, suggesting that the opportunity for a new generation of sovereign wealth funds focused on sustainability growth exists. We are privileged to have a group of world-class experts here today to explore this topic with us. But first, I would like to invite Victoria Barbari, one of the authors of the study, to tell us a bit more about the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Fund, the work that went into the study, and why it is so important. So, Victoria Barbari, she's the Director of Strategy and Communications at the International Forum, which is a global network of sovereign wealth funds with members from almost 40 countries. In her role, Victoria works with the forum members to curate a program of online and offline knowledge sharing and networking activities related to all aspects of their operations, from governance to investment strategies. So, Victoria, it is a great pleasure to have you with us today. And as I mentioned, please, if you could tell us a bit more about the International Forum, the work that you do, the work that went into the study, and what you view as its significance. So go ahead, Victoria.
Yes, thank you very much, Ika. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you very much to FLAR for partnering with us on this study. So the international, for those of you who don't know, the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds is the industry association for sovereign wealth funds. We represent about 50 sovereign wealth funds globally, and our background is in ensuring that sovereign wealth funds have good corporate governance and are independent from government. So our founding tenets are the Santiago Principles, which my fellow panelist Eric Parado, when he was head of the Chilean Sovereign Wealth Fund, was very, very active in making sure they came to fruition. And essentially, we've brought together a group of sovereign wealth funds to implement best governance and investment practices over the years. So in the last 5 years or so, our focus has very much been not only on maintaining those good governance standards, but also in networking between sovereign wealth funds, making sure that they can network, share experience, and also to represent sovereign wealth funds globally. So doing outreach like this is very important to what we do. In terms of this study, the roots of it were, and I'm sure Abdiel can speak to this as well, is that we have very few members in the Western Hemisphere. And it's always been a question that's been asked to me, you know, why do we not have more members in Latin America? And that was really very much the kind of roots to this. And then we were introduced to FLAR, and we decided that why don't we just investigate what the landscape looks like in this part of the world and what can potentially change given the circumstances that we found ourselves now in after the pandemic, in the middle of the energy transition. So we've had a great partnership between FLAR, myself, and Pat Shaner, who's also a panelist, to really kind of delve into not only the current landscape of sovereign wealth funds in Latin America, but how that might develop over time and what it could achieve. So that's really been, it's been over a year in fruition, I think, because we've had to really delve down, and it's been the knowledge that we have in this report has very much been driven from a lot of interviews that FLAR undertook with finance ministries and central banks across the continent, as well as our own network amongst the international sovereign wealth fund community. So it's been a great pleasure to do this, and I've learned a lot, and I think it's an absolutely fascinating topic, because it is one of those spots where I think there's a lot of potential that is yet to be realized. So it's been a fascinating last year and a bit. Thank you very much, Ika.
No, on the contrary, thank you very much, Victoria and the International Forum for this invitation to be able to contribute our grain of salt to this work in the region. So, thank you very much once again, Victoria. And then with these words, I'll now begin to open the stage for a distinguished guest. Each of our guests will have about 5 minutes for the introductory comments, after which, as I mentioned earlier, we will then reconvene for a group discussion for the next 20 minutes. So first up is Patrick Sheena. Patrick is a professor at Tufts University with decades of experience in finance and asset management. He is co-head of Sovereign Net, the Fletcher network for sovereign wealth and global capital, focusing on sovereign wealth funds and their role in global markets. So Patrick, perhaps as one of the co-authors, maybe on top of your own views on the subject, perhaps you could also comment on the work that went into the study and what you view as its contribution to the field and the subject. So the floor is yours, Patrick. Can't hear you, Patrick.
You're on mute, Pat.
Apologies for that. I'm sorry. Ika, thank you so much for that, and thank you to FLAR and also to the forum and Victoria for the opportunity to participate in this. It was equally for me a learning experience. Victoria mentioned that there were 2 dimensions to this. One was sort of looking back and thinking about some of the challenges that exist in the region to sort of expand, right, this existing footprint of sovereign funds. Abdel, Eric can speak and will speak, I'm sure, to some of those themes. I thought I might point this in the forward direction and maybe speak a little bit about strategic investment funds, but more in the context of really the motivation. And when you think about the region, obviously there have been a legacy of challenges over many years, economic instability, political sensitivities to political cycles, all sorts of things. When you look forward, however, their continuing challenges are going to be accentuated primarily because of increased demands associated with, in particular, investments to improve productivity in the region, addressing long-term demographic trends in the region. And so coming back to some of those themes, they oftentimes center around issues related specifically to infrastructure investment. So where and how will the region mobilize large pools of capital, not only for traditional infrastructure, but also for green infrastructure as you sort of look forward to energy transition and climate transition. And that got us to think a bit about how to mobilize capital in the region. And it presented an opportunity to do more comparative analysis, thinking about some of the forum's experiences and broadly the development bank experiences in Africa and also in Asia. And this pointed to an innovation that the World Bank began to seize on several years ago, this idea of a strategic investment fund. You can think of it as an innovation, if you will, an innovation in the design of sovereign investment institutions that invests not externally, but domestically, that oftentimes is not, that doesn't benefit from large surplus reserves, but actually motivated to actually catalyze inward flows of foreign direct investment. And these were things that seemed to play very, very nicely with thinking about some of the persistent development challenges globally, but in particular in Latin America, where the excellent work of the IDB, for example, and regional development banks, but also national development banks have dominated. They've dominated certainly with credit, certainly. This was an attempt to rethink, if you will, right, that sort of development finance model, and think about how innovations in sovereign investment potentially could be sort of positioned for creative dialogue and in Latin America. So specifically, and I'll just close with this, when you think about these institutions, they generally are more focused, for example, on risk capital or equity. They certainly tend to sort of focus in terms of mandates on not only financial returns, non-concessionary, but also economic growth and economic development. That includes social development, and it also extends, obviously, to sustainable themes. So those become important considerations. But most importantly, these institutions require a significant degree of political consensus support, but also strong governance. And this brings us back to some of the challenges in the region which we identified, perhaps to FLAR identified in supporting our research, challenges related to institutional capacity and institutional gaps. So we're presenting this idea as a way to encourage further research, further investigation, and certainly further dialogue. And that was certainly what the intent of our participation here today was intended to foster. So I will leave it there and hand it back to you, Eva. Thank you so much.
Excellent, Patrick, for those insights. I think it begins to serve the table very, very well for the conversation. So our next guest is Eric Parrado. Eric Parrado is the chief economist at the Inter-American Development Bank, a leader in fiscal and monetary policy, with a vast experience in advising central banks and implementing sovereign wealth funds. And in addition to his role at the IDB, he is also a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Frontier Risk. Eric is also a visiting professor at Oxford University and ETH Zurich, actively shaping economic discourse through his research and teaching. And here's something that Victoria hinted to, and I will elaborate a bit. Eric was not only one of the founding members of where the Santiago Principles were adopted, but he was actually being held in Santiago. He's the one that actually proposed the name to the group, and he was adopted. So that's another claim to fame for Eric. So Eric, please go ahead. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Iker. You're so generous with your introduction. So many thanks again, and hello everyone. It's a real pleasure to be in this event, at least virtually. So thank you very much to FLAR and the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds for the invitation. And congratulations to you, Iker, Victoria, and Patrick for the report, which is the base of our discussion today. It's very important to think and discuss these important issues because I'm convinced that sovereign wealth funds are part of the solution to some of the global challenges. And as you said, I have the opportunity to manage the Chilean sovereign wealth funds. I was the founding manager of the funds, and I guess, and I hope that we send a good message in terms of how to deal with savings and how to use those savings in the rainy days. Also, I had the opportunity to advise several countries in the world to setting up sovereign wealth funds or similar tools, including Panama, Colombia, Guyana, and Suriname in Latin America. So I know a little bit about some good lessons and also bad lessons in terms of how to develop this type of tools. If you allow me, I'm going to share a very brief presentation about the topic. So let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
Perfect. So if we go here, okay. You pose a very important question regarding if regional sovereign wealth funds can expand and grow in Latin America. So the brief summary is that yes, but we need to do our homework. So this is the the first message. There are today, as the report pointed out, 12 sovereign wealth funds in Latin America, most of which are stabilization funds designed to manage volatile fiscal flows. So we have several examples in that regard. Latin America sovereign wealth funds have generally not evolved beyond stabilization purposes to, for instance, domestic economic development, strategic funds, and so on. And the reasons are several, I would say. But the first important issue is the lack of fiscal surpluses. And in a later slide, I'm going to be more precise about that. Of course, political instability doesn't help. Fiscal mismanagement. We have a long discussion regarding efficiency or inefficiency of fiscal expenditures and the lack of a good level of fiscal revenues. And of course, there is a lot of immediate pressures in terms of social needs. And the report suggests that there is a potential for sovereign wealth funds to expand in Latin America if structured as strategic investment vehicles with strong governance rather than just a stabilization fund. And this could help in some way attract foreign investment and drive economic development in key sectors. So I think this is a brief summary of the answer and the contents of the report. And let me try to give some elements for discussion regarding why aren't there more sovereign wealth funds in LAC? And here I'm showing you a picture where we have the primary fiscal balance on the x-axis and the MB spread in the y-axis. And you can see that if we put together all the sovereign wealth funds in the world, many of the big sovereign wealth funds are concentrated on the right side, on the lower right side of this picture. So you can find Kuwait, you can find Qatar, you can find Norway, you can find Azerbaijan. And on the other side, when you find like fiscal deficits, there are some tiny funds. And here we are trying to say, okay, the primary fiscal balance, we're taking an average of 10 years. So if you can find some sovereign wealth funds in that region, it means that they run fiscal surpluses before that period, okay? But the main message here is that you have to run real fiscal surpluses to have this type of sovereign wealth funds. We always have discussions with Victoria, with Iker, with other colleagues in terms of why is happening that. And always said sometimes countries like to implement sovereign wealth funds and they have the idea to create this type of tools. But at the same time, the first question that I ask to them is, are you running fiscal surpluses? Because if you're not running fiscal surpluses, it means that you are creating a new fund with debt and not with real assets. And the analogy that I use a lot is that it's like withdrawing money from your credit card and putting that money in your savings account. So it's not efficient, it's not useful, so it doesn't work. And that's one of the main problems. What is the solution? Of course, trying to look forward-looking, trying to be more prudent, and trying to implement some fiscal rules, for instance. If we have an average, if we look at the last 10 years, the primary fiscal deficit in Latin America is around 1.2% of GDP. So it's very difficult to save money in these current conditions. So if we don't have like a clear strategy, not only for stocks, but also for flows, of course, it's very difficult to establish any type of sovereign wealth funds. So if we believe in the policy recommendations of the report, we have to think a strategy to find additional resources to fund other type of sovereign wealth funds. Not only having the fiscal rule and trying to think long term, but also to try to find other financial resources. And of course, an example is try to be more efficient in terms of state-owned companies, and probably you can sell part of the company for a different management that could be more efficient. So here I'm showing the Santiago principles, and as you said, Iker and Victoria, we are really proud about this. This reflects the commitment of Chile, because we had an agreement in Santiago of Chile. So we try to be very transparent within Chile, but also in terms of the international discussion. But you can see that Santiago principles, in terms of the compliance, we are in the middle and probably in the lower bottom. So I think we need to do an additional effort in terms of implementing these principles, because it's related also to the behavior of the fiscal stance in many Latin American and the Caribbean countries. Now, if we try to think about this specific strategic sovereign wealth funds that the report tried to make a policy recommendation, I would say there are three aspects that we need to have a deeper discussion. One is that what I call over-optimism about political will and stability. The report may be overly optimistic in some way about the potential for Latin American governments to establish and maintain well-governed strategic investment funds. And given the region history of fiscal and political instability and several policy reversals, there is a risk that such funds could be mismanaged or repurposed by future administrations. We need to have a discussion on how to ensure long-term political commitment and stability necessary for these funds to succeed. And probably not only for these funds, but for any savings fund, any savings tool. Second, underestimation of existing development finance institutions. The analysis may underestimate the role and potential of existing development finance institutions in Latin America, such as national development banks and multilateral institutions. So the report suggests that the strategic investment funds could be more effective, but there is no clear evidence to support this claim or fully explore how these new funds would complement or potentially conflict with existing institutions. And finally, the third point is the lack of specific implementation strategies. So while the report makes a case for strategic investment funds in Latin America, there is no detailed country-specific strategy for implementations, and probably this is an opportunity to discuss that. And I would say that we need to explore potential challenges or risk in transitioning from stabilization funds to strategic investment vehicles, or try to complement funds that have a long-term view in terms of stabilization, but also this new type of strategic investment vehicles. So with that, I will finish. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share these ideas.
Well, many thanks, Eric. We certainly will jump into several of these issues in the conversation. I already saw some faces reacting to that. And our final guest this morning is Abdiel Santiago. He's the CEO of Panama's Sovereign Wealth Fund, the FAP. Abdiel has over 20 years of experience in financial services, including leadership roles in equity investment research and financial regulation. His extensive background includes working at Morgan Stanley, New York, where he led top-ranked equity research teams, and serving as financial analyst at the U.S. Securities Exchange Commission, focusing on regulatory oversight for asset managers and broker-dealers. Abdiel, I would think that given your extensive experience, hands-on, being the CEO of a fund at this point in time, and so you're a hands-on practitioner. I know that you have an abundance of wisdom and insights and certainly opinions on the subject. So please, Abdiel, the stage is yours.
Yes, well, good morning. Thanks a lot, Iker, FLAR, Professor Shena, Victoria, the IFSWF for the invitation, and the IDB, of course, Eric. So I'm among friends here, so I can be very direct. I think Victoria mentioned that I would have a view on the creation of sovereign wealth funds in the Latin America region, and that is true. Sometimes it feels, for me, that it's like fighting windmills. But I don't really think is that it's more of an uphill battle. I think Eric, smartly identified, very important pillars of problems that need to be resolved. And I do have I guess a little bit of a different view on one of the issues, and that is the issue of that you have to have a fiscal surpluses necessarily to have a sovereign fund. I think conceptually that makes sense, but if we sort of put these conditions, and you look historically at deficits in the region, Panama included, we pretty much have run fiscal deficits. And I think fiscal deficits is connected to one of the other issues, which is political mismanagement. I mean, I think political mismanagement, or fiscal deficit, I think is a function of political mismanagement. Now, I'm not an economist. I've been accused of playing one every once in a while, but I do think that the region has a lot of tailwinds, that could be, beneficial for the creation of these instruments or these tools. And I'm a big proponent of them. And Panama, the FAP is a great example. It's probably one of the few examples where, a creation of a government creation, a political creation of this tool actually worked as it was intended, and that was during COVID. The fund, the FAP, was set up to be a savings tool and also a rainy day fund. Literally a rainy day fund. If it rains too much, the government has to act and needs the money for helping the immediate need. Then it taps on the fund. So during COVID, obviously it was a different type of emergency. It was a different type of disaster. But we were able, in coordination with the government, to provide the government with about 10%, a little bit less than 10% of the fund, to help them get through this disaster. And that was only possible because there was, and I think Eric mentioned this, and Patrick as well. There was a very clear, governance structure on the fund to ensure that these assets, about 3% of GDP in our case, and in Panama's case, a little bit less, were protected and were invested in the right way. And it's as a side note, Eric, I've known Eric for over 12 years, and he was there when I was actually interviewing for the job, and happy that he didn't tell me to not take it, because I think it's been a very rewarding experience. But he was he's been right on point from the very beginning. So I think it is these tools, if implemented, going back to the strategies properly, actually do work. Now, going back, and I'll finish off here, but going back to the tailwinds that the region, the Latin America region, the LAC or the LAC region. I don't like LAC because it sounds like lacking. So the LATAM region, young population, lots of commodities, and you know, just separated from all the stuff that's going on the other side of the world. So you know, again, I think you know, there's several aspects that I think, you know, we can get through to get, you know, some of these organizations implemented. Again, I don't believe, personally, I don't, well, I believe a couple of things, but, you know, one is that all countries, especially the Latin America region, should have a sovereign fund. Now, you have to define the purpose, why you have one, whether stabilization, whether savings, whether strategic investments. Obviously, that's clear. And I also believe that, you know, that you have to, you know, you have to get all the political stuff out of the way. And I do believe that that is primarily the main barrier, and not so much the fiscal side, even though, you know, again, Eric made a, you know, convincing argument, but I think it's more of the political aspect. And if you show politicians that these tools actually work, okay, and how do we do that? Well, we're going to rely on the IDB, we're going to rely on the World Bank, we're going to rely on the IMF to help these governments realize that these tools actually work. Let me just say one other thing. You know, the political opinions, I think, in every country are probably also a function of what the people want. And I think if you can show the people, the population, the normal citizens, that there's this fund that is almost like a lockbox, that the governments or different governments can't touch it unless there's a particular, you know, rules that must be followed. I think that's going to be very convincing for normal folks to support anyone that wants to champion these investment and savings tools.
Well, many thanks, Abdiel and Eric and Patrick. So you know, from these initial comments, I do have several lines of questions. One, the first one I would like to go into is that the title of the study and what brings us together this morning is that the title of the work, the paper is Can Regional Sovereign Wealth Funds Expand and Grow in Latin America? So seeing your comments, Eric, and then looking at the findings and recommendations of the study goes deeper into the strategic investment funds. So that goes beyond stabilization and these other intergenerational, you know, that are kept outside the country. And I do agree with all the comments you make about how politically infeasible that may be for countries with such dire needs as ours. But then I do find these strategic investment funds element quite important. And then my reaction would be that you say that without fiscal surplus, this is something that would not be viable. But then I think somehow these funds would be like you know, regional development funds or national development funds, in the sense that these resources are given to this vehicle, then this vehicle then leverages those, and the particularity is that it will be done internally. So, you know, contrary to Abdiel, I have never been accused of being an economist, and I clearly am not one. But so I'm not very knowledgeable in these elements. But I would like if you could, you know, develop a bit more this line of thinking on the strategic, because perhaps I think my feeling is that you don't really think that they are necessary because there are other things, or I don't know if I'm misreading you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the discussion. I really like the comments by Abdiel and your question. So let me try to elaborate a little bit further this topic. So I probably we need a lot of needs, and if you can think about something which is very strategic for any country is infrastructure. So if you can think about infrastructure, probably you have to say, okay, let's think about a tool that can support countries to think long term and trying to avoid the political cycle. So this is, I think, a very good objective, and I think everybody would agree on that. Now the devil is in details how to do it. One alternative is to say, okay, probably having regional funds, having multilaterals to support that effort in terms of trying to have some sort of fresh resources coming from investors, coming from international investors, can help to support the efforts of countries. So that's one option. And I like that option because I think we should be more active in terms of this type of infrastructure. Patrick mentioned all the green infrastructure that we have to put together and so on. And I think we have to join forces with all the multilaterals to help our countries on that. Other discussion is to say, okay, let's think about those tools within a country, within a poor country. If you are the Minister of Finance, you have a budget, and then you have to say, okay, I have to spend the money in education. I have to spend the money in health. I have to pay salaries to teachers. I have to pay salaries to doctors and so on. And then we recommend that, you know what, we need to have a strategic fund. Can you allocate 10% of your budget in this? Today, it's extremely difficult, unless you have a commodity boom and then you have a really big fiscal surpluses that you can say, okay, part of this, I can put it in a strategic fund. So that's the issue, the main issue that I would like to convey. So I think it's a good idea to have this type of funds, but we need alternatives in terms of trying to get these new revenues or these fresh revenues. And that's why I mentioned just briefly the possibility of to transform inefficient state-owned companies in companies which are much more efficient. And the seed money would be to sell part of those companies to be in private hands. Then you start with the seed money and you transform your company from an efficient one to a company that can give you some financial returns. That's the second issue. And the third issue that I put it on the table is that you don't want to have a parallel budget if you have these additional tools, in terms that probably you can manage to attract foreign direct investment and you can co-invest, but I would try to leave the clause of debt for that tool, because I prefer that all the debt discussion should be within your budget and not in a parallel one. So sometimes you have these ideas to create funds, but at the same time, you have like the possibility of these funds to issue debt, and that could be a much more complex problem for poor countries or middle income countries like in Latin.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I don't know if Patrick or Abdiel would like to, would have comments on that, or would like to react, or
may I?
Sure, go ahead, Patrick.
I just briefly. I thought Eric's original comments were extremely valuable, because we're here to promote dialogue, right, and to explore. And I think that those 3 points were an excellent framing. He set it out, with a focus on political will and consensus. Without that, none of this goes forward. And part of the challenge with funds in the region that have failed, Venezuela, I'm thinking, right, is a lack of rules-based practice and governance, to Abdiel's point, but also the will, right, for that to work effectively. So, that I think that's an excellent point, and it should not, certainly should not be overlooked. This second point I just want to react to is this idea of the overlooking the sort of regional funds. And actually, our objective, and if this didn't come through clearly, we've got to go back and maybe do a little tuning. But the focus from our standpoint was to add another tool in the toolbox, actually, that would encourage and promote partnership and cooperation in a way that would allow for the regional funds, and here I'm thinking of the IDB particularly, another opportunity to mobilize capital, actually in this case, risk capital, which tends to somewhat better align the interests, and particularly around governance, with foreign investors who are also like sovereign wealth funds that are committed to deliver sort of scaled capital. And, we found something super interesting, I think, looking at the IDB in particular, and IDB Invest in specifically, that we found that one of the mandates of IDB Invest was actually to partner with sovereign wealth funds. Now, the idea being that this type of institution potentially created an opportunity for a domestic investment fund to be a local partner, potentially with IDB Invest. So we thought that was, something that perhaps should be accentuated. Again, maybe it needs to be further accentuated. But, the last point was in particular critical. And that is that, yes, we certainly did not try to be presumptuous, right, and offer any specific implementation details. But, I think this goes back to your first point, right? If you survey, and we've surveyed a lot of the funds in Africa and in Asia, one of the things you find is they're each very different. They're each very different with respect to mandate, with respect to addressing local needs, and they're all also very different with respect to capitalization. And one of the interesting things about many of them, like Temasek originally, is that many of them are capitalized with state-owned assets, like state-owned funds. So you make an excellent point, right? That that these assets can be transferred into these institutions, some liquidity created through sales, and then the capitalization or the funding reside in the fund, but under a mandate that would allow it to be potentially redeployed in ways that you described, like providing risk capital that would catalyze additional funding from the development finance institutions in a blended way of the sovereign wealth funds to maybe begin to address some of those really large, infrastructure problems. So.
Okay.
Can I jump in? I know I think my computer was messing up.
So yeah, at the end, do go ahead, and then we take some questions from the audience. But do go ahead.
Yeah. Okay? So I'll be very quick on this. But I think in a way we're talking about sovereign wealth funds as a monolith. I think there are different types of funds. And I think it sounds to me in this conversation that, sort of the savings or the stabilization funds are probably the more problematic in terms of creating them. So let me put that aside. So let's go to another type of sovereign wealth fund. And I know this is controversial because some of them don't consider themselves sovereign wealth funds. But let's talk about strategic investment funds. Strategic investment funds is, I think, what, and I think this is, I'm trying to link up, sort of come to terms and come to a meeting point. I think that this is what Patrick and Eric are talking about in terms of state-owned entities or SOEs. I think you don't even have to go beyond that. Just the fact that you could create a sovereign fund and call it whatever, strategic investment fund that houses these institutions, these companies that are government-owned. And just by virtue of encasing these countries, these companies in a management structure that is efficient, that is pro-business, that is smart and has a lot of experience, just by virtue of housing these entities in such a structure, you create efficiencies, and these companies could run better, and again, could provide some of the basis for some of the cash flows to be used for other purposes. But strategic investment funds, as everybody knows here, are probably the hardest ones. But I think in this conversation, these companies already existed in the region, country, government owned, whether it's water utilities. That could be controversial, but commodity companies partly owned, and just creating that could potentially provide a pathway to the creation of these vehicles. So I'll just leave it at that, but that would be my 2 cents in this whole conversation.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks for bringing that perspective. Yeah. So I mean, we are in the bottom part of the conversation, and we have received a good number of questions from the audience. So I'm going to lump in several of them, and I'm going to tie those to a comment that Eric made. Eric in his presentation commented that there was a lack of implementation strategies in the study, and the audience also comes around these elements. So Enrique Fernandez from the National Competitiveness Council, he comments on what strategies can attract multilateral institutions as investors in strategic funds. And then Amlan Roy from the London School of Economics comments or asks, what lessons can smaller Latin American countries learn from Singapore, Qatar, and the UAE in managing sovereign wealth funds? So I don't know who would like to take a first crack at this question.
I can take a quick crack, but I think we could learn the last question. I have issues with my computer. The last question, I think that we can learn a whole lot. To start, it's the way that they structure their governance, right? Who are the board of directors? I mean, the board of directors at the end of the day is the entity responsible for managing. People in my role, just merely, we just execute. But if you don't get that right, make it apolitical, make it, business focused, that I'd say, that's one of the biggest lessons that we can learn.
Yeah, and I'll just sorry, Ika, I'll just move on add to what Abdiel says, is that I think Eric's comments are exactly right, that it's all around political will. And I think that something that Pat and I came across when we were writing was that the idea that it's too hard, that these things are too hard in Latin America, the obstacles are too great, the politics is too difficult. And I think for both of us, we've worked a lot in Africa, and I think for us, we see a lot of those same problems mirrored in Africa, and yet somehow the political will, there is all the issues that you get, but you've also got all the tailwinds as well. You've got the young populations and the commodities in Africa like you have in LATAM, but you also have difficult politics and questionable governance and all the other things that go on, and criminality. But yet somehow in Africa that this has happened. And I think that it's not these challenges are not insurmountable because of the opportunities. And I don't think that and I think you're right, exactly right, Abdiel. It's about governance, but it's also about saying, and I think you made this point earlier, it's about someone taking a decision and going, you know what, this could be a benefit for us because we're investing in our future. And you could take it down to, well, the interest rate that we're borrowing at is higher than the return we might get. But then you've also got the return in the real economy from some of these strategic investment funds, that if you do invest in infrastructure as a sovereign wealth fund, yes, you expect financial return, but you also have the multiplier effect on that in a real economic in a real economy space. And I think that, and I've said this for a long time, but it bears repeating, that for many countries with growing and large populations and large development needs, that the best way to invest in the future is to invest in the now. And you know, if you could invest in these things, in infrastructure, in social infrastructure as well, and make some money out of it, but also then you get the dividends later in tax revenues and so on. And I think especially in LATAM, getting people into the formal economy to increase those tax revenues is super important. So I just think that's an important point to make.
Okay.
Those points are really important, what Victoria mentioned. And I would say these challenges are for any fund, for any savings tool. And that's why we're trying to insist to implement fiscal rules, to be more prudent, to have a long-term view of development and so on, and try to avoid the short-termism of the political cycles. So very important points that Victoria mentioned. And regarding the first question of some people from the audience is that, for instance, sometimes you have a lot of needs and you have a lot of projects in Latin America, you have a lot of capital elsewhere, and we need to have a bridge between those worlds. And FLAR, the IDB, should be in the middle to try to say, okay, let's try to have this reach and try to attract investment to our region. So I would say identification of projects, very important. Try to be part in terms of the investment to say, okay, we know the risk and we can invest with you because we believe in this project. So I think that's a very important component in terms of trying to take a look to strategic investments, as Patrick and Victoria mentioned, to say, okay, if we need infrastructure, first we need to identify infrastructure in all the places, then attract foreign direct investment, and probably the multilaterals have to play an active role on that. So trying to answer that first question.
If I want to very quickly just reinforce one point. You can look at the big funds, Temasek and Kazan and some of the others that have done this. But I guess what I would suggest is to look at the smaller funds that are actually struggling with the same issues that you see in Latin America, and the way the innovations that they've attempted to implement to try to address undercapitalization, to try to address the fact that, you know, we don't have sufficient project preparation facilities and we need to deal with issues like that. And actually to create these governance structures, as Abdiel says, in order to make global investors more comfortable, private equity investors, infrastructure investors more comfortable to basically create that connectivity that, you know, that Eric's describing.
Just, I don't know if, can I jump in, or so I just want to take what Victoria said and Eric said. I think in some ways these tools or these funds is in essence a de-risking mechanism, right? So you know, you have the fund in the country, and then you want to bring these investors, whether other sovereign wealth funds and or private investment. And by the way, you know, looking at the chart that Eric had, I'm just amazed. You know, the bubbles for these other funds, Middle Eastern and North Europe, are huge. I mean, I don't think that there's any reason why our bubbles, you know, should be, you know, this, you know, as small as they are. But anyway, that's another comment. So I think, you know, going back to, you know, our friend, you know, Adrian Orr, who used to run the sovereign fund, superannuation fund in New Zealand, who now is the central bank head in New Zealand. You know, he had a phrase, and I think this is, you know, apropos here, which is, you know, mutually assured embarrassment. So I think these funds could provide this de-risking mechanism, so that these investors, sovereign funds or private equity investors or just you know, asset managers, are able to join forces as Eric said, identify specific assets. This is not free money. They expect a return. And again, this is a specialized tool that all governments in the regions should have. It's high time for this to happen.
Okay. Well, we are very close to the end of the session. We have many questions, which I see that we certainly could not cover in the 3 minutes that we have left. But there's one that I kind of find interesting, and if any one of you will want to take a crack, but very, very quickly, from Rodrigo Roche. He asked on what emerging trends do you see for Latin American sovereign wealth funds in global markets? So I don't know if any one of you may want to jump in on that one.
But I could jump quickly. I mean, I think is about technology. I think we should have a Y Combinator type model in every country, because I think technology, and I've said this before, is something that can really help the region. A region where infrastructure is kind of lacking. People can't get to work because there are no buses, or buses are crowded. All kinds of things. I mean, technology. If you could sit in your home, obviously you need good internet access. Now we have satellite. You can work from home. I mean, that kind of stuff, really improves productivity. So I would say just technology writ large.
Ika, we can't hear you.
Oh, okay, sorry. So we are upon time. So we have several interesting questions left. I have many left, but I guess I will have to take those offline. So I would like to just close the session. We have come to the end of this very insightful discussion, and I would like to thank our esteemed panelists for sharing their expertise and perspectives, and also to our audience for their very active participation today. We have explored the challenges and opportunities for sovereign wealth funds in Latin America, highlighting the potential for these funds to evolve from mere stabilization tools into powerful engines for long-term growth and development. The importance of strategic investments and governance and regional collaboration was made very clear by our panelists and by the study. And I hope that this conversation sparks further thought and action in advancing these initiatives. Let's continue to work together and unlock the potential for sovereign wealth funds to a sustainable prosperity for the region. So thank you very much to Abdiel, to Eric, to Patrick, Victoria, and to TOTS, and to the International Forum for Sovereign Wealth Funds. So highly appreciated, and many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.